Hi, folks. I'm Tom Henscheid. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's kind of a mixed blessing. I kind of worried about the whole thing. Not only was I encouraged to recall my past, but then I had to get up in front of a bunch of really scary people and vocalize it. We had a little bit of a tumultuous relationship, my dad and I. Is that better? Thank you. My parents got married really young, and within 11 years, they had 9 kids. So clearly, they had something figured out. My dad came from a family of 11 children, and my parents were actually going to try and do better than that and have an even dozen, but they had to stop short. They announced it to us, and of course we were all just heartbroken, us kids. And the only way to manage a big household like that was with sort of an iron fist, and that's the way my grandfather handled his family. And so my father, as would be expected, sort of brought that theory along. This is my dad up here, the one on the left. His name's Bernie. You can see he really enjoyed fishing, and he's really happy in this picture because this picture was taken about the time that he really started to find out who he was. And I happen to be old enough to see that process. On your right are my kids and me back in my big beard days. I chose that picture because my kids grew up in this church. My daughter, Julia, is now 35 as a professor of fine metals at Evergreen State. Go Evergreen. And my son, Nicholas, is now 31 and is a research applied mathematician getting ready to defend his PhD. So they've done really well for themselves. My dad had a business as a credit counselor, credit reporter, and a bill collector, a job that he really sucked at. At least I thought he did. And as a kid, I was rather embarrassed in our small community that my dad had to be this sort of guy that went out and made people pay their bills. But I didn't see the whole story. And that was the only way that my dad had to try and support this big family. And many times he was very frustrated and very angry and very, very grief-stricken and afraid that how he was going to let his family down and let the community down. And so he would come home to this place of solitude only to find these insubordinate children protesting the Vietnam War, and you know, that entire picture of frustration eventually landed my father in a mental hospital that just happened to be in my hometown. So everybody in this small community knew my dad was a nutcase. But when I would go down and visit my father at the hospital, I started to really see who my father was. He had sort of let go the anxiety, let go the pressure, and he veritably floated through that hospital, and he was revered by everyone in the hospital. He would wear a tie and a white shirt, and most of the other patients thought he was another doctor. He would introduce me with such pride, and everyone just seemed to really love this man. And when the community had heard that Bernie was having troubles, the entire community came to us. They surrounded us, because what I hadn't realized all those years is that my dad really was Jimmy Stewart in A Wonderful Life. And his job as a credit counselor and collector, he was out there doing amazing things with people. and he was taking all of their stress on himself. And I didn't really realize that until I saw him in the hospital. And as we would sort of float across the wards, I could see that he was sort of at home and had found a community. And that community enveloped him. And he spent the last 20 years of his life as an employee of the hospital, as a counselor, teaching wood shop and coaching volleyball. And you just can't believe the love that that man had for all of these people. He was at home at that place. And about the time that this photograph was taken is when he was at the height of his glory in that hospital. The community surrounded our entire family so much that it transformed my entire family, and no longer did I have one father, I had 100 fathers. It truly did take our entire village to support us as a family. Now, when Laura Hebert, my wife, and I, some of you know Laura, she's much more involved in the church. When we got married, actually 40 years ago today, Laura's in Portland with her stepdad, who's 97, maybe the last time she gets to see him for Father's Day. And we started having children. We brought this collective community with us. And no longer was it incumbent on me to mold my children into my image as a father. Laura and I, an inseparable couple, learned that what we needed to do is simply supply our children with the tools to mold themselves. And clearly, we supplied them with the correct tools. They're doing wonderful. And every day I am inspired, not just by my ancestors and my father, but I am inspired by my children and the father that they have helped me to become. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for allowing me to share a few of my thoughts and reflections about my dad, Robert Andrew Palmersheim. It's really an honor and quite an opportunity, so I appreciate the time in front of you. Dad's dad was of German descent, and his mom was fully Irish. She lived well into her 90s, and Dad was always her little Bobby till the end. Dad was the fourth of 6 children, and my mother the eldest of 6. So when they got together, what'd they want to do? They had 6 kids as well. Now you can imagine, we had aunts and uncles and cousins galore. Family gatherings were second nature. That was the norm for us. We had such a great time together. Dad was a big family man and loved kids. When I was in grade school, Mom and Dad opened up our home to another young man, a teenager, who they brought in and treated us and loved as one of their own. Dad understood that love is not divisible. It's not diminished, but rather is amplified and grows as it's extended out towards others. Dad did that with those that he prayed with, that he sat in the bar with, that he laughed and joked with, and all of those that he brought into the fold. In our home, he always made people feel important and welcome. He was always trying to feed everyone. Back in high school, my mother learned to fly an airplane, and she taught Dad to do that as well. After his college studies, John Lynch taught him to be a professional pilot. He became a chief pilot, general manager, and eventually co-owner of the family business. I flew with him hundreds of times, and always felt safe crisscrossing the Rocky Mountains of Montana. We always landed safely despite the winds and turbulence. In Montana, when tragedy struck and a plane went down, it was my dad that they reached out to as the search and rescue coordinator. He was well regarded in his field, best in class. He is the type of man that you could count on in good times and in bad. He was reliable. Dad was a leader and provider for dozens of employees, office staff, mechanics, linemen, pilots like himself. They knew him to be fair and even-keeled, and they loved him as well as so many did. Dad was a very loving and loved man, a humble man despite his position and success. In matters of religion, I remember Dad asking me when I was a kid, "Tom, why did God make you?" And the correct answer was to know him, to love him, and to serve him. Dad lived by that creed. Mom and Dad also taught us that Jesus addressed our Creator as Abba, Abba Father, Daddy. I still like that. I think that's really cool. In time, my parents became more comfortable with the notion of a mother-father God, and they were fortunate to move to the country to a small rural community that ran out of priests. So they and their friends made that community and worshiped in that community. Maybe like the early Christian churches that Jesus might have imagined, with a visiting priest every other week, just to, keep things in line. I guess that's where I come down, believing in a loving, creative force in this universe and in our world. That's what Dad taught me, and it gives me strength, because if you're a child of God, who can be against you? You're already on top. Many years ago, I dedicated a book I wrote to my father, who I said filled me with his essence and lifted me up into the Montana sky, and to my mother, who carried me into this world and bathed me in love. The cool thing about having really great parents is that it provides one with a glimpse into the true nature of things, the way things ought to be. And it's best to close one's eyes when one seeks the true nature of things. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, please close your eyes and think of your father. Think of your father and your father's father and his father before that. Think of our fathers going back, all the way back in time. All the way back in time. And where do we find ourselves? Where do we land? But in our Father's arms. Thanks, Dad. Thank you, Grandfather. Thank you all.